Member for Puchis, you have 14 minutes and 30 seconds of original time left. I don't know if you wish to make your application for the extended time now. So you're granted leave, so you'll add the 15 minutes on. Okay, thank you.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. To return to a few issues that occupied our attention before the break, I wish to go in some detail on some of the issues that we touched earlier but did not detail. Madam Speaker, just to sum up the point here, that the expert consultant was extremely careful to recommend that settled regulations be the subject of consultation with the stakeholders. And we would expect that the government will give us some time frame within which there would be settled regulations and a time frame when the stakeholders could be consulted. Madam Speaker, the Attorney General also indicated in his address that the government in the last fiscal had collected, I believe it was $71 million in taxes from the sector. We are also informed that that $71 million is less than the year before, so that nothing changed in the sector vis-a-vis the bill. The bill was not introduced, the bill was not effected. So if you are annually collecting less and less, then why is that happening? Given that the industry, we expect, is mushrooming. You have more people in industry, but every year you are collecting less tax dollars. And that may well be, as we are informed by those in the sector, of a result of the onerous and burdensome taxation framework that this very government introduced into the gaming sector. Because you see, the government faced a problem. Well, they faced several problems, but one of them is that given the mismanagement of the economy, the collapse of the energy sector in the aftermath of Petrotrin and what is happening there, the now ongoing, unraveling collapse of the mega deals of Dragon and Lauren Manatee and so on, because today we heard from the Prime Minister where this Lauren Manatee arrangement.
Madam Speaker, Standing Order 48-1, please.
Well, okay, so Member for Puchis, I'll give you a little latitude, but please, we're not talking about Lauren Manatee. It's just for you. I think you were saying it in the context of something about the economy and effects. So just keep it very narrow, please.
Madam Speaker, for the latitude. So given the collapse of all these areas, which will not bring revenue in the foreseeable future, the Lauren Manatee, if I could say so, the Prime Minister indicated it is not until 2025 that we will see development that would lead to revenue. Given all of that, it is quite understandable that the government will seek to find those areas, those sectors in the economy to raise revenue. And indeed, the gaming sector is a key area for revenue collection. And this is why the opposition has no difficulty in principle with legislation that seek to create a framework where those who are involved in wealth creation in that sector pay their just due. So that is our principal position. But if you are already declaring that every year you are collecting less, you must ask yourself why. Why are you collecting less? Madam Speaker, a key concern that we have always had is with the workers in this sector. Because the sector has what we believe to be between direct and indirect workers, about over in excess of 20,000 people. And when you profile and deconstruct that sector, it appears like a sector almost akin to the private security sector. It is, in some cases, low wage. It is highly female. It is single parents. It is urban as opposed to rural in the majority. So it is an industry that has a worker profile that is unlike other financial sectors. I put it to you that it will not be the same worker profile for the insurance sector. It will not be the same profile for the banking sector. It will not be the same profile for the manufacturing sector. So therefore, in making comparisons of treatment, one has to be careful because this is a sector that appears to have no other comparable. Possibly the private security sector, and as you know, we are also dealing with that matter by virtue of a joint select committee as well. So when you look at the sector, you must be very conscious at a time like this, where whether we quarrel or not, or we quarrel over figures, significant amount of people have lost their jobs. By virtue of Petrotrin, direct and indirect workers, you are talking about thousands, in excess of 5,000. If you add all the plants in Point Lisas, you add manufacturing, you add this, you add that. I think just the American Chamber issued a statement a few days ago indicating what? Trinidad and Tobago at a standstill. Now, the government will not want to hear that. They will not want to hear that. They said that the people, the skilled people are leaving. Madam Speaker, there are people in this country today who tell you all they're waiting for is the general elections. They want to know what's happening. Otherwise, they leave. Now, if you take a position like this where you don't care about the workers, and in this sector, critical workers, single mothers, low income, low wage, flexi work, those people in this sector, Madam Speaker, when we interview them, they tell us that sometimes this work is helpful. The time of work is good for them because they can spend time at the home. They can come out when the children are sleeping and go to work for a few hours, come back before the children wake up to go to school. They work some during the day. So it is a job that attracts a certain group of people. Madam Speaker, when we chose to introduce this bill in 2015, in the Senate, in the other place, they made reference, of course, to a representative from the sector, then Senator Gibbs Mohammed. And the senator had some interesting things to say on the 9th of the 6th, 2015, on the Gambling, Gaming, and Betting Control Bill 2015. The senator said, and I quote, she was referring to he, and the he, I believe it was the member for Laventille West. He spoke up for us, and I remembered, and I shared this story just a while ago. Honorable Fitzgerald Hinds, the MP for Laventille, he met with our union members, and we expected him to come and listen to our plight. But instead, he gave a speech damning us all, many of whom were his constituents and known to him for working in the industry. The senator continued, this is the public record, of course, I'm quoting from. Mr. Hinds, I want to take time to tell you today that I have driven through Laventille and their surroundings, and many of our workers are very proud today to wear our membership club's uniform. They are proud today to wear badges. They are proud that they are doing the right thing for their children. They are proud to be exemplars in the community and their families. Many said that Mr. Hinds turned his back on us. We did not turn our backs. The industry is a special industry, and it supports many, like the children, old people, through our donations, various charity activities, and so on and so forth. And the senator outlined the critical nature of this sector, but also the lack of compassion, I believe, from then Senator, now MP from Laventille West. And I heard it in the tone of the last speaker when he made reference to, corralling workers and bringing them there and so on. That is the tone that you believe that, these workers are mindless. They cannot think for themselves, so it is easy to corral them when they are pursuing their collective interests. And their collective interest is to have a stable job, a job that they can earn a reasonable income. They are flexible in their employment. Yes, their sector contributes to tax, and it is an area that you could be proud of. Madam Speaker, I have never been to Las Vegas, I confess. I haven't been to much of these gambling capitals of the world because, Madam Speaker, in my life, I don't think I've ever gambled away a dollar. I value money that way, and today I'm proud to be the recipient yesterday of what could be an increased amount of income. So, and I assure you, I will not gamble away that. I will not gamble away that at all. So, Madam Speaker, well, one more case on the list. Madam Speaker, so I don't gamble, but I'm told that in those cities like the place off of China, I think Macau, I believe it is, and so on, they hire 80% of the working population. The people are proud to belong to that sector. They are proud that they work in the hotels and the casinos and so on, and they enjoy decent terms and conditions of work. They don't feel lesser, they don't feel cheated, they don't feel, abused and so on. And this is the sector we want to create. Now, Madam Speaker, I gave you an employment profile of the sector. I want to come back to this point. In our proposed legislation, and I just want to make a point, the member for Diego Martin Northeast, sought to make, big, heavy weather out of a minor issue, which is, yes, we know this is a motion before us today, and the bill is effectively the same bill, but if you adopt the motion and the amendments, it changes fundamentally, in some cases, the bill. So it is the motion we are dealing with. Madam Speaker, the area that deal with the licensing requirements and so on, I just want to quote a few areas there in the bill itself. When we look at the bill that we look at, you have renewal of license expiration, fit and proper criteria, Schedule 2, and so on. Madam Speaker, I already called the various categories of workers that would be licensed. And I believe, it's an exhaustive list of people, of groups of people. And Madam Speaker, when you look, for example, at the Schedule 2, I believe it is in the package before us, Madam Speaker, and you look at this matter that they are calling, Madam Speaker, fit and proper, and I was taken aback by it, Madam Speaker, for several reasons, because, what exactly is fit and proper in a context? It must be contextual, it must be, reasonable, it must be something that, persons can satisfy, the criteria that they can satisfy, and it must have, Madam Speaker, some measure of predictability. That is an important point. It cannot be left to the whim and fancy of any group of employers or any particular industry-specific persons to apply, whatever criteria they want. So Clause 41, for example, speaks about mandatory that every applicant for a license must be fit and proper. And Madam Speaker, in the schedule, which I just want to look at very briefly here, Schedule 2, fit and proper, and let me just read from it. Every person shall be considered fit and proper if that person is of good character, competent, honest, financially sound. What is financially sound? Now, you can imagine that good and character is measured by a TTPS certificate. Competent, well, you can look at education or training or experience and find competence. Honesty, well, that will come from good character and maybe a reference or two. But what is financially sound? Is it that you need to get a statement from a bank, a credit union, that you have a certain amount of monies there? Is it that you're financially sound? What is it in this context, where you are dealing with workers and employees who may be at the lower rung of the educational ladder, without financing that way? Madam Speaker, people come to our office, and when they apply for a house, for example, I remember somebody will not have $2,000 in the bank, but coming to your office and say, well, I want to get a HDC house. And say, well, how would you pay for this HDC house? So financially sound, what does that mean? Reputable. Now, reputable, maybe, I don't know, what is reputable? A letter from the imam, the pundit? What is it reputable for the member of Diego Martin Northeast? Because what is reputable to him is not reputable to me. I never built a wall that fall down. The people of Grenada are not looking for me. Madam Speaker, I was in a taxi in Grenada 2 years ago, and they asked me if I knew somebody with great respect named Imbert. I said, I only know one, and you cannot have two. They said the people of Grenada are looking for this man. Madam Speaker, they showed me some edifice somewhere in Grenada where something fall down. The person must be reliable, discharge responsibilities fairly. Every person who is to be an owner, director, shareholder, associate, trustee, committee member, manager, or key employee of a licensee must be adjudged to be fit and proper person to hold a particular position. A key employee. Who is a key employee? What is a key employee? And fit and proper. In determining whether a person is fit and proper, the board shall have regard to integrity, fairness, honesty, reputation, competence, diligence, capability, soundness of judgment. No, soundness of judgment. Man, we can have cabinet ministers can't satisfy this. Financial soundness and so on. That comes again. Where a person being assessed as fit and proper corporate entity holds a minimum share, well, that we can find out. Controlling shareholder, that good. I don't want to go there. But when you look, for example, Madam Speaker, Schedule 251C, I can go to that. Being the subject of any adverse findings or any settlement in civil proceedings, particularly in connection with banking or financial business, misconduct or fraud. Now, they speak to a specific group of persons here, of course, but when you talk about adverse findings, you know, adverse findings of what? Of who? Of an inquiry, of an investigation, of a court and a judgment. But if you do that again, Madam Speaker, half of them can serve as cabinet ministers. If you say you are not subject to adverse findings, because an adverse finding could be anything. It could be a finding by who? It may be untested. It might be an adverse finding that is untested in a court of law, Madam Speaker. And Schedule 2, F and G, an employment record which leads the board to believe that the person carried out an act of impropriety in the handling of his employer's business. And G, being dismissed, asked to resign or resign from employment or from a position of trust, fiduciary appointment, or similar positions because of questions about honesty and integrity. Madam Speaker, this G in particular is troublesome. There are persons, for example, who in employment situations, matters arise involving impropriety. And what they do is they say, look, resign. Let's use cabinet ministers as an example. Matters arise in the public domain. You tell the minister, look, minister, we don't want to have an inquiry. We don't want to have anything to make trouble, put you in court, criminal prosecution. Just resign. And they resign. But there are, Madam Speaker, adverse findings. They would be they were asked to resign. So if someone is asked to resign, they cannot participate in this sector. If they were asked to resign for any reason, Madam Speaker, dealing with, of course, the issues before us here. And those are some of the troubling issues that we have raised. Clause 44, 2B provides that the Commission may conduct a review where the licensee or person who exercises a function in connection with the activities has been convicted of a criminal offense. Is it that all criminal offenses will trigger such a review? Because they don't qualify it, Madam Speaker. It would be untenable for the Commission to be able to trigger its review powers of minor unrelated offenses, and that can be clarified. However, the way the bill is drafted, there is indeed such a danger which could lead to abuse. Madam Speaker, Clause 45 of the bill gives the Commission the power to suspend a license after a review has been conducted. Subclause 8 then proceeds to outline what the Commission may, in particular, quote unquote, have regard to when considering the suitability tests. And subsection 8AD outlines the different considerations which the Commission may follow. Integrity of the licensee or any person who exercises the activity, exercises a fraction or interested in the licensed activities, competence, financial order, circumstances, and so on. Madam Speaker, we argue that these clauses are vague and uncertain. The Commission has to consider the integrity of a person who exercises a function. It is to be assumed that all persons engaged in the business. Is it assumed that all persons engaged in a business of a casino would indeed exercise a function? The bill should define what function, or at least what class of functions. This way the clause is framed properly. The licensee may have his license suspended. What exists now, the person can have his license suspended, Madam Speaker, by a misinterpretation of the law. The various considerations also point to a person interested in the licensed activities. The term interested is not defined in the bill, and that is another issue. It is unclear what that means. It is unclear what it means. And the question will arise as to whether it is vague, it is uncertain. And we have these cases all the time. Madam Speaker, we pass legislation and we clap, we pat ourselves on the back, we go home happy. We phone Geneva, London, and Paris, and everybody happy. And then 3 months, you come with a list of amendments. 75 amendments for a bill that had 45 clauses. That's what we do. I am appalled that we passed the procurement legislation, and the member for San Fernando West spoke about that. So no 48-1 on that.
As if it were our crime.
We passed legislation for 4.5 years, coming in 5 years, no regulations, but comes now with extensive amendments. So this procurement legislation will never see the light of day. Never. And we have to ask ourselves whether this will suffer a similar fate. Because as it is now, let us be real, this thing will not be implemented in the, 5-6 months that the government has left.
No chance.
It will never be implemented. This is to satisfy their international partners in the various financial regulatory areas. So this will not be implemented before they demit office. I am almost certain, not almost, I'm certain of that. So, Madam Speaker, they're doing it for another reason. And again, that is their business. The other area, just to dig deep into, Madam Speaker, and the area raised by the colleagues in the minority report, the report that they don't have, because they claim it is not attached to the document that they have. And I think in 7 months, they could not ask one question to get 1 page. From particularly from 2 members who they see every week. They see 2 members every week of their life and couldn't ask 1 question to get 1 page. Now, if that is not delinquency, I don't know what is, Madam Speaker. I don't know what is. Madam Speaker, offenses and penalties, an issue raised called sanctions. Sanctions for illegal gambling amounts to 5 million fine and 20 years imprisonment. We believe they are draconian and oppressive. The members were querying the proposed heavy sanctions and fines. They appear to be illogical and disproportionate when compared to other offenses. And I'm told even offenses such as violent robberies. Madam Speaker, a person who has been granted a license but who fails to place a license sticker in a conspicuous place can be fined $500,000 and sent to prison for 20 years. Now, where would you place, if you fail to place a sticker in quote-unquote conspicuous place, where is that? Huh? Now, you go into these bars and you see room 4 above the kitchen door. You see room 3 somewhere else. Where are you placing it? Madam Speaker. But here the fine for that, $500,000, 20 years in jail. Madam Speaker, we are provided with, for several, well, MP's office, but ministries and so on. We have the picture of the Prime Minister and the President. I hope you don't put a fine like that, because these pictures will fall down sometime and you can't see it. And you put a fine that if you can't see the Prime Minister picture in a conspicuous place, you get 20 years and $500,000. It cannot be so, it just cannot be like this. Madam Speaker, and sure, there must be a fine because this thing has legal repercussions and so on. But you have to rethink these kind of fines. Which other body of law they want to compare? Which other body of law, if you don't have room 4 and room 3 all over the rum shop, which other, is that a fine of $500,000? 4 years in jail? Is that? If it is, let me know. In the case of a normal casino patron who sneaks a chance to cheat at a game, that same person can be fined $1,000 and sent to prison for 1 year. So somebody who cheats could get 1 year. Somebody who don't place a sign in a conspicuous position, 20 years in jail. And the government has no problem with that. They see no problem with that. They say that is good. We could do that. They can do that. And while they're doing that, on the one hand, want to put people in jail, they announce all the grand measures to take people out of jail. Madam Speaker, the Rehabilitation Fund, Development Fund, and so on, I heard, government members making heavy weather of this. And yes, this is an area of, there's something called the addiction of chance. The addiction of chance. Chance develop in your bloodstream, so to speak, by little things. Do you think you should take an umbrella today because it will rain? Yes or no? And you take a chance. Chance is in a bloodstream, and I use the word bloodstream from a non-scientific point of view. Human beings live their life with chance. You believe that it will not have traffic at a certain time, so I'll go to the supermarket at that time. There's a chance. All people go through that. Some will go much further because they live on chance. They play, member for Arima on Sunday, a game of cards. The member for Arima is a very, very enthusiastic card player. Not good, but enthusiastic. And well, Madam Speaker, I'm not in the age range to play with him, because when we met, I think there was another table for persons my age. Madam Speaker, you throw money on that table, I am told, given the legislation, how it operates now, Sawa Barataria. You throw money on the table and you make a chance, you could be breaking the law. You go to a wake in the night, you could be breaking the law. The wapi player in the village, breaking the law. So you need to fine-tune this so that you understand that part of the sector. Now, when you live in the bourgeois areas down on the northwest and so on, you have your boat, you have your Mustang and so on. You don't think of rural Trinidad and what happens in these circumstances. You don't, Madam Speaker. And you are selling it because I'm sure there's another one you're procuring before demitting office. So you don't think of these things. But I ask the government to please consider this. Madam Speaker, I want to warn the member for Diego Martin, who is Northeast, defaming me. You will pay a high price. If you defame me, you will pay the penalty. So, Madam Speaker, the matter now concerns regulations, the matter concerns interpretation, the matter concerns the board appointment and so on. And I want to just amplify one matter there. This is a multi-sectoral type of industry. You have different groups of people, you have different financial people, you have investors, you have what is called worker representatives or organizations of workers and so on. And the easiest thing to do was to include the various sectors in the appointment of the board. That was the easiest thing to do. If you include various sectors in the appointment of the commission, so to speak, and we have examples of that. Over the years, we have been doing that in every part of public life. We have been doing that, Madam Speaker, so that you take the stakeholders, whoever and whatever they are, including banking, finance, and so on, and you put them on your commission. They are commissioner, and you work with that. I think WASA has that type of arrangement as well. Other types of boards. What else? The RHAs as well have that. So what is the big deal about having stakeholder participation in this sector, which is a multi-billion-dollar sector, Madam Speaker? And you want me to finish? Okay, I will, because if they want to respond to me eagerly, I won't take all the time, but the issue of key person, I think I raised that already in relation to licensed businesses. Any person who is an owner, director, controlling shareholder, and so on. Again, it lacks objective criteria. In that, I'm just going through, Madam Speaker, to ensure I have all the points. Now, there's I want to go to clause 6.6, establishment constitution of this commission. Clause 6.6, I believe, is where I want to be. Madam Speaker, and I think that was the subject of some amendments as well when they come through. The commission shall be managed by a board appointed by the president on the advice of the minister. We all know what that means. This formula for appointment can lend itself to all manner of abuse and political interference and bias. When you control a huge amount of money and revenue and so on, it is different from when you're in a state enterprises that, really implement public policy. So let's make a distinction with state enterprises. There are some that implement cabinet policy, state policy. There are some that really manage enormous wealth. And this is an example of the latter. Now, you will have political appointments in state boards because they implement government policy. Where you have boards and commissions that manage private sector wealth, so to speak, you must have a different formula for appointing commissioners and boards. I don't know if they can understand that. It is expected that such a significant commission, given its novelty as well, would be independent in the same way that the procurement board is contemplated. We recommend that the appointment to the board be reformulated, Madam Speaker, to have stakeholders nominated by representative bodies and ensure
Member for Urupuch
that the
East, your time is now spent.
Speaker for the opportunity.
Member for Porter-Spain North, St. Anne's West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we're here this afternoon, as we heard from the Minister of Finance in piloting the bill, after many, many years of toing and froing with respect to this industry. At the outset, Madam Speaker, every civic-minded and right-thinking citizen would agree that this is one sector, one industry that requires immediate regulation. There can be no doubt that this is an industry that has the opportunity for many abuses, and many abuses that affect our citizenry at all different levels. So today, what we're here to do, finally I say, is to implement proper regulation of the industry. A short while ago, we heard from the member of Urupuch East, and in his contribution, he mentioned some other jurisdictions that their whole economy is driven by gaming and gambling. For example, Macau, Las Vegas, these are but two that fall into that category. What the member failed to tell the population is those are two of the most highly regulated jurisdictions with respect to gaming. And that is what we are here to do today. Because you see at the outset, Madam Speaker, for the record of the Hansard and for the population through you to understand what we're dealing with, this is a thriving industry in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is estimated that it yields approximately $16 billion a year. So let us put that on the record. All of the talk and the attempts to pull on heartstrings, the fear-mongering of directing at workers on different levels and going after the lowest level workers, I will deal with that. But at the outset, what we are being called upon here today as the representatives of Trinidad and Tobago is to regulate a $16 billion industry. And I am certain that the amount of tax that flows from that $16 billion industry is minimal, de minimis, as we would say in law, compared to the industry. So one of the holes that we're called upon to plug here today, Madam Speaker, with the greatest of respect, is tax evasion. And that is what this is about today. And I'll get into that further. This is an industry that employs an estimated 7,000 persons. It is reported that in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker, there are over 200 private members clubs operating and over 20,000 amusement gaming machines. 20,000 gaming machines spread throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And anyone who's on the ground, anyone who is accustomed to traveling throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago, including in the most rural of areas, would have realized a phenomenon has sprung up over the last 5 to 10, maybe 15 years, that every little hole in Trinidad and Tobago now has these gaming machines. What we haven't talked about as yet for the evening, Madam Speaker, is the addiction and the effect of addiction on many families, how it destroys family life, how these machines are set up in an unregulated manner, not only denying the Board of Inland Revenue the taxation from it, but also strategically set up in every bar, even including in some small parlors, as we call it. When I walk in my constituency up to yesterday and you go into the small parlors, they now have 2 machines in there. The bigger ones, the restaurants, have machines, and they're set up strategically so that persons, whilst they're waiting, they're there plugging their money away. We haven't discussed that here today. We haven't discussed the need for regulation. We haven't discussed the type of criminality that springs up out of this gaming industry at all levels. So let me start, Madam Speaker, also by talking about tax evasion. And one of the reasons and the necessity for proper regulation and the setting up of a commission, because every serious jurisdiction, Mr. Deputy Speaker, every serious jurisdiction in the world that faces gaming, be it Las Vegas, be it Nevada, be it New Jersey, be it Macau, Bahamas, even we dealt with Ireland at the instigation of the member for Chaguanas West, if I remember correctly. Every single jurisdiction has a regulated industry. And what we're seeking to do here today is set up a properly established commission to regulate it, to collect the taxes, to make sure that people are protected. The gaming industry in Trinidad and Tobago, and we must face it frontally here this afternoon, is one of the main outlets and opportunities for money laundering. It is an outlet for money laundering. And one wonders, why would anybody who wants to stop criminality in Trinidad and Tobago oppose the proper regulation of this unregulated industry? It is also being used internationally for terrorist financing because it is very easy for it to take place. I was just in a conversation during the tea break reminded that it is also in Trinidad and Tobago a major leakage point for foreign exchange. The members opposite come here screaming bloody murder about lack of foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago. The gaming industry is a major leakage point for foreign exchange, and let me say why. Because the vast majority of the big casinos in Trinidad and Tobago are not locally owned. They are foreign owned by owners in Turkey, by owners in other places throughout the world. And I guarantee you, they are not repatriating the money and the funds they make in TT dollars. So it spurns that whole economy of illegality and the leakage of foreign exchange. And I also want to put on record, at the outset of the demonetization exercise that was conducted by this administration, when the Minister of Finance and I sat with the financial institutions for the implementation, one of the first questions I asked is how many financial institutions bank casinos in Trinidad? It came down to one. It came down to one because the banking industry, the financial industry in Trinidad and Tobago took a decision years ago to get out of the business of banking the casinos. And the sole reason for that is because they run the risk of being de-risked. They run the risk of being blacklisted as banking and financial institutions. Because you see, when a casino owner turns up there with their tens of millions of dollars in cash, because people don't go to the casino, I assume, with checks. We've heard one of the stories from the member for San Fernando West. We all know what happens. The money laundering and the illegality of people going purchasing chips, leaving it on a table. There was a story of a former member of government, a former minister of government, going all the way to Las Vegas, and a contractor meeting him there or his son there, and leaving chips on a table for collection, and those chips weren't gambled. They were taken right there to the booth to exchange for cash. Classic example of the type of illegality, criminality, and money laundering that takes place. But take note, Trinidad and Tobago. We are here today to finally regulate an industry that demands regulation. Addiction. Many, many families globally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are affected by the scourge of addiction to gambling. I remember witnessing it once. The only time I ever went into a casino in Antigua, and it was a friend who had encouraged me to go. And I watched him spend the money he had and start to ask for more money, and eventually asked me to borrow my credit card because he was convinced he was about to strike lucky. And immediately when I saw that, I understood how this could destroy lives, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So we as 41 members of Parliament, elected by the people of Trinidad and Tobago today, are called upon today to regulate this industry and not to come here, as we heard an admission from the member of Oropuch East a short while ago. He said, I am here today on the side of the workers. Fine, I'll talk about workers. But what was so compelling to me and so interesting is an admission on the Hansard. He said, I'm here for the industries and the companies. That's right. That admission came from the member of Oropuch East. We heard the Honorable Attorney General make some startling suggestions in his contribution. And we deal with addiction in this legislation. We deal with addiction in this legislation through two funds. This is also about terrorist financing and anti-money laundering. And I heard the mockery from the member for Oropuch East. Oh, it's for Paris, it's for Brussels, it's for here, it's international obligations. And that is the same attitude, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I remind the people of Trinidad and Tobago, that is the exact same attitude by the member for Oropuch East that led us to the brink of being delisted.
Who signed us up for that?
Right? Well, we were part of FATF. But they signed us up until Global Forum. And yes, there are international obligations. The Attorney General from day one has been traveling all over the world to try and satisfy our obligations and convince people not to de-risk Trinidad and Tobago so we wouldn't lose our correspondent banking. I remind the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, the population, we were taken to the brink with the United States of America with FATCA legislation where you would not have been able to pay your children's school fees in the United States. You would not have been able to do those types of things because we would have lost our correspondent banking. This is another potential. It's not why the legislation is being passed, but it allows us to tick that box, and there is nothing wrong with that because they signed us up to the obligation. And it is irresponsible to take the country to that brink. So what we're here to do today is we're to debate about the establishment of a gambling, gaming, and betting control commission. And what does this commission do, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Before I go there, it really bothered me to come here to this house where every single one of us are elected by the electorate outside, and to hear once again in what is becoming a disturbing modus operandi, the way of doing business by this time the member for Oropuch East, as he blatantly attempted to mislead not only the members in here, not only the House in here, but the population outside. I listened carefully to a minority report because you see, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I sat on the committee, and this is a committee that we've been sitting for almost 3 years to try and make sure we get this right. And the member for Couva South was on the committee, the member for Chaguanas West was on the committee, and we all contributed. The progress of that committee, I am happy to say, was for the vast majority a mature progress. Contributions were listened to, and I'll get to contributions in a short while. Back to what we're the disturbing dishonesty and blatant attempt to mislead the population of Trinidad and Tobago about a minority report. So you see, the first time we hear about a minority report is coming here today in the debate. So I turned to my colleagues who also sat on the committee and I said, what minority report? Because today I asked the Parliament for a copy of the papers for the debate. And when I looked at it, our report, the report of the committee, is dated November 20th, 2019. Just now. The report of the committee, signed by the chairman of the committee, Minister Imbert, is dated the 20th of November 2019. We come here for the first time, screaming and shouting. There's a minority report signed by 3 members. What was the date? Go back to the Hansard, Trinidad and Tobago, go back and see what is the date of the minority report. as proffered by the member for Urupuch East today in his continued attempts to mislead the population of Trinidad and Tobago. You know what's the date? The 24th of June 2019. How could you have a minority report
Before?
24th of June and the report is signed on the 20th of November 2019?
You mean he lied?
How does that happen, Mr. Deputy Speaker? The next thing you're hearing a lot of talk about, again in an attempt to mislead the population, which I find offensive, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is regulations. You must have the regulations first. You must have the, let's take it step by step. The regulations that have been put before the committee and gone through by the experts are not regulations created by this administration. Those regulations were created by a UNC administration. And I put it here to the population of Trinidad and Tobago today via Cabinet Minute 733 of March 26, 2015. March 26, 2015, a cabinet decision taken by a UNC government for the establishment of a regulatory regime for the gambling industry in Trinidad and Tobago. Cabinet agreed to approve the undermentioned documents regarding the legal and regulatory framework for the gaming industry, copies of which were attached to the note. And it lists the exact same regulations that were brought to the committee, looked at by the committee, looked at by the experts. So point number one, Mr. Deputy Speaker, their regulations, not a word changed. Point number two, which is where I find it to get offensive. How could you pass regulations, put forward regulations, until you have the parent legislation? Because if the parent legislation, the bill, isn't passed to become an act, that is where regulations spring from. So to come here today and to attempt to mislead the population that we can't support this act, we can't support this bill because there are no regulations, first of all, is your regulations. It's your regulations, we haven't changed a word. But secondly, until we pass the bill, you can't get to the regulations. So why keep throwing up the smoke and mirrors?
To protect my power.
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I then get to the body of the act that's before us because we need to tell the population what we're doing. And immediately when one goes to some of the amendments made, I am proud to be part of that commission, that committee. Because you see, what happens in Trinidad and Tobago is a lot of foreign entities and foreigners come here, establish their establishments, their casinos, etc. And as I said a short while ago, massive leakage of foreign exchange because they're repatriating their profits and the money being made in US dollars back to wherever they come from. But you see, there's also an element of criminality. And I remind the population of Trinidad and Tobago. A few years ago, I think if I remember correctly, it would have first come to the fore in about 2014. There was a certain American individual who was tracked down to Trinidad by the US authorities, I believe from New Jersey, and requests made to extradite him. And you know what it was about? That he was using one of his money laundering operations in Trinidad, a casino, in one of the larger mall establishments, Grand Bazaar, if I remember correctly. And he was wanted for money laundering and tax evasion in the United States. He did not come into Trinidad for money laundering and tax evasion at TT dollars. So that is the proof of the foreign exchange leakage, but also the criminality. And that is how the US authorities deal with it. But what we're hearing here today, by the contributions and the jokes and the making it, trying to wash it down, is leave it. Leave it unregulated. Leave it as it is. You're attacking the workers. I'll get to the workers. There is no attack on workers in this legislation. So again, that is an attempt to mislead the population and to scare the workers. This will end up protecting. So let me get it. Immediately when I saw the definitions of associate, the definition of controlling shareholder, and the definition of key person, what we have done there and I'm saying through you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the people of Trinidad and Tobago, is we're capturing those persons. Because you see, what also happens is the real owners, the beneficial owners of these establishments don't always put themselves in the forefront. So they will send other people to appear as though they're the owners because it is part of a money laundering operation, or they don't want to be known, they want to be below the radar. What we are proposing here today is that once you have even a 5% shareholding or any beneficial ownership, any controlling say in it, you need to be captured and you need to go through a due diligence process to get the license. That has to redound to the benefit of every single citizen and law-abiding citizen. Because at the end of the day, you want to hold somebody responsible. The man who is living wherever he is living the high life at the detriment sometimes of those who are coming into their establishments. This is good law. So we go then, if I may, through you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to the objects of the Act, because I think it's important that the population know the objects of this Act, found at Section 5. The first one is to protect minors and other vulnerable persons. I am reading from the Act that we're being asked to pass here today. The objects of this Act, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are to A, protect minors and other vulnerable persons from being harmed or exploited by gambling. Who could oppose that? Who in this House would stand up here today and say no? B, to ensure that gambling is conducted in a fair, open, and responsible manner. Laudable. C, to prevent gambling from being a source of crime, being associated with crime, or being used to support crime. So you see some of the measures that the member for Oropuch East was attacking in his normal manner, being the class clown about. These are serious measures to deal with crime and criminality, and it is stated here, it is to prevent persons from taking advantage of the disadvantaged in our society. D, to ensure compliance with written laws. We took off international laws and we put written laws for anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing in line with FATF recommendations. E, to ensure consumer protection. F, to provide for the collection of taxes. We have heard here today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is estimated to be a $16 billion industry a year. $16 billion of a $52 billion budget. Do the math. That is over a fifth of our annual budget. And we must not regulate this. We must not tax it. We must not protect the vulnerable and the minors. Is that what we're being told here today, Mr. Deputy Speaker? And that it must contribute to the economy by protecting employment, not destroying employment. That is the narrative they want to sell. It is a false narrative. Let me jump to that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In 2015, when this legislation came under a different administration, we've heard enough about that. In 2016, when it came and it was laid here, all of a sudden there were protests outside the Parliament. There were people coming, and you heard the member for Oropuch East say you're attacking. Yes, I remember that. They reached outside the Minister of Finance's house via maxi taxis, all in the same uniform. Right? Correct. And let me tell you what happened, because I can talk about this firsthand. As I sat in my constituency office at the corners of Observatory Street and Quarry Street, one of the most challenged areas in East Port of Spain, some of them came to see me. And you know what they told me? They told me that the owners of the casinos basically told them that if they didn't put on those jerseys and they didn't go and do what they did, they would be fired. And you know what is the frightening thing, Mr. Deputy Speaker? There is absolutely nothing in this legislation that any law-abiding owner of a casino should fear. Because this is not going to reduce the amount of money. This is not going to stop people from coming into your establishment. What it may do is ensure that you pay tax. But they were telling their workers that if this legislation is passed, they would move, they would lose their jobs. And you heard it being repeated here today. That isn't true. Because on the other hand, you then hear the member for Oropuch East talk about Macau and Las Vegas, and how workers, they are proud to be part of a booming industry. Why is it that if you're called upon to follow the law, to pay tax, to ensure that people are properly looked after, you will lose your job? There is nothing in here that requires the small single mothers and the small people in our constituencies to go through any process that's going to mean they can't get a job. So I am telling them and putting them on notice today. All of that is being done to create a sense of fear, to create a sense of panic, and it is not real. It is not here in these pieces of paper before us. I then go to the qualifications of the commissioners. Because you see, as is usual, it's an attack on who should appoint and what should be appointed, etc., and that there will be these commissioners who will be appointed would only want to do what the minister wants. Not so. There is nothing different with what you're looking at here as to what applies for TNTech, which is a commission, as applies to WASA, which is a commission. Nothing unusual. But let me show, right? Let me show here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the persons we're calling upon to form this body, to look after the interests of Trinidad and Tobago, shall be qualified to be members of the board by reason of their work and experience in the gambling industry. So all of the screams and the cries again, the falsehoods, the misinformation, the attempts to mislead that there are no stakeholder representation. You heard it repeated over and over by the member for Oropuchis. Again, a blatant attempt to mislead the population. The first qualification for a member of the commission is that they must be, by reason of their work and experience in the gambling industry or fields relating to law, finance, information technology, economics management, social work, or law enforcement. What could be challenged in that? What is wrong with that? It goes to the appointment of a very important committee for the first time, an audit and regulatory committee at section 12. I wouldn't waste time with that. But let's now go to what this legislation is calling upon the commission to do, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This commission and the need for the formulation of this commission is firstly to regulate and control the operation of gambling in Trinidad and Tobago. B, to provide such information to other regulatory and government agencies, including the Board of Inland Revenue. Is that what the fair is about? You don't want a commission because you don't want the BIR to know how much money you're taking, how much of the $16 billion pie is yours. And then it also includes the Financial Intelligence Unit, the FIU, the Integrity Commission, Customs and Excise Division, the Commissioner of Police, and the Betting Levy Board. Any of those bodies or entities are challengeable or offensive for information to be provided by the regulatory body to. You can immediately understand why each of them is like that. One important point that hasn't been touched on at all, in fact, it was skirted over by the member for Oropuchis. The commission is also to set up a rehabilitation fund and a development fund. And I want to tell the population of Trinidad and Tobago, through you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what that fund is about and how well thought of this legislation is and why it should be passed. I mentioned on a couple of occasions families that are destroyed by addiction. And this is one type of addiction, gambling. You've had massive international sporting heroes caught up in it, and it has affected their lives. Well, it's not about them. It's about the same small people that we are called upon as parliamentarians to protect. The small people is who this legislation protects. It's quite the opposite of what is attempted to be sold here today. The Rehabilitation Fund is established to assist non-governmental organizations and other groups working with vulnerable persons and their families suffering the effects of gambling addiction and other forms of harm and exploitation associated with gambling. So what we're looking to do is allow these bodies, these NGOs, and they came to us in consultation. Some of those bodies came to us in consultation and told us, and some of the members were recovering addicts, how it broke up families. What we're doing is setting up a fund let the same casinos and other gaming houses provide the money to finance these bodies. That is laudable. The development fund is established to assist persons in the area of sport, social and community work, arts and culture. So again, if you're going to have this industry, at least let some good flow from it for the better of the population of Trinidad and Tobago. But of course, nothing said about
Honourable
that.
Member, your initial speaking time has elapsed. You have an additional 15 minutes. Care to avail yourself? Proceed.
Thank you very much. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we were hearing a lot about fit and proper criteria. And again, in a typical attempt to stir up panic and to stir up concern that this is some sort of draconian, and the words were being used, is onerous legislation. Onerous for whom? Onerous for those who share in the $16 billion industry? But when they operate in other jurisdictions, they all have to abide by regulations. Every single other jurisdiction they're operating in, they abide by regulations. Let me tell you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, all of those machines I spoke about, the 20,000 odd estimated machines, what is envisaged by this is that each one of those, because it is possible via technology, would be connected to the commission. And that allows us to be able to properly establish the data as to how the machines are being used and to tax them. So the scream and cries about if you tax my machines, you remember when we came in 2016 and it couldn't be done with the passenger bill because the bill was sent to the Joint Select Committee? The Minister of Finance in that budget put a number of additional taxes on these tables and these machines all over the country. At the time, they cried bloody murder. They said people will lose their jobs. They said nobody. Has that happened? At all. Not a single machine. Not a single machine was pulled off. We have more. As I say, anybody who walks on the ground will see how these machines have infiltrated Trinidad and Tobago. And even though the law says not under a certain age, I have seen the small children going into the same parlors and putting their little money in. And what are we doing? What are we doing as elected members of Parliament to protect them? Sit here and throw words? Sit here and attack? Sit here and mislead? That is not what we were elected to do, with the greatest of respect, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Certainly that is not how I see my responsibility. And I'd be surprised if any member in here sees his or her responsibility to destroy the fabric of what is good in our society, or to protect the young and vulnerable, as this piece of legislation states is an intent. Fit and proper criteria. I'd like to put on record, not a single word in the fit and proper criteria of this act found that Schedule 2 has been changed. So you know what that means? It is the identical language that when they on the other side sat in government, brought to the houses in 2015, the House of Representatives and the Senate, it is exactly what they approved as a cabinet and were pushing through Parliament. And the reason it remains unchanged is because the committee, including the members who sat on the other side and contributed, did not see it fit, no pun intended, to change a word. So why come here today and attack fit and proper? And why would you challenge that persons associated in this industry should not be fit and proper? Why shouldn't we do what we can to stem criminality and to cut it off? How could anyone argue against that? The workers. I wouldn't get into the response of the collapse of the energy industry because it has nothing to do with this debate, but is a complete falsehood. Again, the Honorable Prime Minister came here today. He made a statement that is very, very clear as to the benefit of Manatee, but still the attempts being made to tie it up as Lauren and Manatee. Worker profiles, we heard it, the dog whistling, the attempts to bring fear, the attacks on the member for Laventil West, saying that they are in his constituency and they came to him for protection in 2015. Workers, don't be fearful, because there's nothing this government would do on this side to destroy your livelihood. In fact, what this legislation is seeking to do is to protect you against the vultures who are your employers, to make sure that your employers do what is right, to make sure that we establish funds to help the communities. And that is what it is about. There is nothing being introduced here today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that could legitimately affect casino workers. It's a billion-dollar industry, $16 billion. That is bigger, I suspect, than quite a lot of our manufacturing sector. Correct. Yes, because our government revenue is around in the 30s, 40s. So it's almost half. And it's not being taxed. There's massive tax evasion, and that is one of the holes we're seeking to plug here today. Right? So don't give in to the fear-mongering. When the bill was introduced in 2015, it was good enough then. It has only been improved now. There were attempts to cherry-pick and pull out some of the penalties, some of the sentences. If those are legitimate concerns, let's deal with it in the committee stage. We have said we could deal with those types of things, but they're not, because what is wrong with a casino owner who does not place his sign? That's one of the points being made. If you don't place your sign and your license in a conspicuous place, a fine of $500,000 or 20 years in jail. First of all, those are maximum sentences. Secondly, there is nothing unique in that. But it showed me that persons may not be familiar with being VAT registered. Because if you're VAT registered, the law calls upon you to have your VAT certificate conspicuously shown. As the member for Oropouche said, when you have licenses to serve liquor, they have to be conspicuously shown. So it's nothing new. You're not going to be jailed because you put it in the wrong place. Stop the fear-mongering. Stop selling that. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I say here today, without fear of contradiction, that the reasons for passing this law, finally, and to bringing it to this level of debate for us to see the passage, to regulate a $16 billion industry, to regulate the spider web that touches on the lives of the small people and the big people. Because many wealthy people have lost their wealth through gambling. Today, we are being called upon to regulate it. We're being called upon to put a stem to some of the criminality that might flow from it. And with the greatest of respect to all of my colleagues, I can see no plausible, legitimate, justifiable, law-abiding reason as to why this industry should be unlike everything else in Trinidad and Tobago and remain unregulated. We have to protect Trinidad and Tobago. We have to protect our citizens, we have to protect our foreign exchange, and we have to ensure that we pass the right laws. Like the rest of the world, the Attorney General has told us here today, we are the only jurisdiction in the world that doesn't regulate gambling and gaming, falling under IMF, an IMF report. How could that be something that we want to continue as people of Trinidad and Tobago? So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with those few words, I thank you for the opportunity to having contributed to this bill. And I say that the people of Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West, stand fully behind the passage of this piece of legislation and say, it took too long, but we're here now. Let's pass it. Thank you.
Well done, sir.
I recognize the member for Laventille West.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am grateful to you for providing me with an opportunity to make a relatively brief contribution in this debate. I have noticed in the course of these deliberations, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I have heard from the member for Diego Martin Northeast, I have heard from the member for San Fernando West, I have heard from the member for Port of Spain North St. Anne's West, all of whom alluded to the fact that the UNC, during the committee stages, when these measures were taken to a joint select committee of the Parliament for as long as 4 years, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and their utterances today in this debate, I have noticed that they continue to be obstinate and to be obstructionist. I noticed that the Attorney General was exasperated at their behavior. He pointed out, as I just said, that for 4 years we were in the JSC, the Joint Select Committee, and the members opposite went through every single clause, chaired by, of course, the member for Dago Martin Northeast. They produced no minority report, but alas, the member for Oropuch East rose and produced a document which he flaunted and told us that, in fact, there was a minority report. We now know that that was simply not the truth. I can understand why the Attorney General was exasperated. No minority report. In the course of law, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when 3 judges or 5 sit in a matter on appeal, it is not unusual to have a dissenting judgment, meaning 1 or 2, a minority of the judges, may express a view on the case that is different from the finding of the majority. It is called a dissenting judgment, akin to a minority report. But importantly, in that dissenting judgment, the learned judge or judges, Mr. Deputy Speaker, would give logical and acceptable reasons for their diversion from the view of the majority. It is done to elucidate on the issues, to stimulate the intellect, and to provide clarification on the law. Good reason. One would have thought if the UNC had a minority report, they would have written it and they would have got up here today and to present for the benefit of the Parliament and the people of Trinidad and Tobago coherent and logical reasons as to the reason why they cannot support this. But no, they spent 4 years in the Joint Select Committee. They agreed or pretended to agree with everything. I understand one senator, Senator Wademark, took every opportunity to delay and to tarry, typical UNC strategy. And then today they come to object and refuse to give support to these measures. That is typically the behavior of the UNC. The big question, of course, is why? They raised the constitutionality issue, and the AG pointed out to them how banal that is. We have provisions in here under the enforcement clause, which I'll come to later, that deals with the obtaining of a warrant in order to give access to premises, in order to ensure compliance with this law. And the AG promised to show them again all of the basic cases, whether it's the Freitas and others, as to why you can touch on these matters without the need for a specified majority. The law is clear about that. Like the cannabis decriminalization project that we took and effected recently, Mr. Deputy Speaker, while we decriminalized marijuana, the commission that investigated it found that notwithstanding its illegality, there was widespread use of marijuana for all kinds of purposes, including recreational, for decades, for over 100 years really, in the Caribbean region, including Trinidad and Tobago. Similarly, while we know as a fact that the gambling industry is unregulated, giving rise to all kinds of issues, economic issues, criminal issues, money laundering issues, financing terrorism issues, social issues. Unregulated as it is, Mr. Deputy Speaker, It is widespread in its application and existence around Trinidad and Tobago. In other words, it is real. Minister Young, the member for Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West, read and he pointed out there are over 20,000 machines everywhere in little country districts in rural areas. You go into a drugstore, you go into a corner shop, you go into a watering hole, a rum shop, there is a machine. It is in widespread use. What is missing is proper regulation. And the government, having cooperated with the UNC in the Joint Select Committee and the independents, and as for the independents, they signed on to this report and they agreed. They are on the side of the agreement on this, but not the UNC. They didn't sign it. They didn't produce a minority report and come here today, 4 years later, to frivolously tell us why they can't support it. All kinds of foolish reasons. But I, the member for Laventille West, I am not surprised at their behavior. I have seen that time and time and time again. They don't want nothing good for this country. We know that. I know that. And came here today to give what I consider to be the most putrid and unfair impression of the people who support them in the national community. If I had to judge their supporters on the basis of their behavior in this parliament consistently, I would think very poorly of them. But I know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they may represent them constitutionally and electorally, but they don't represent the behavior and the ethos and the well-meaning operations to Trinidad and Tobago. Attorney David West said the Gambling and Betting Act 22 of 1963 is outdated, and the Proceeds of Crime Act 2009 has never been used to charge anyone accused of suspicious financial transactions in private members' club. And they make reference to the Trinidad Princess Club, of which I just spoke. The article says, Trinidad Club Princess has been open on Independence Square, Port-au-Spain since 2006. Club Princess was named in a lawsuit against attorney Chrislyn Moore before she became Justice Minister. And the article goes on. She was corporate secretary for 2 companies, and the companies were sued. Moore and 2 Turkish businessmen, Sudi Özkan and Zafir Hakan Unal, were accused of oppressive and lawful conduct towards American businessman Thomas Baker. But when they checked, they found that there was no listing of 44 Limited and Alnando Corporation in Trinidad and Tobago's registered list of private clubs. And David West is opining in this article that they should be regulated. Subhas Ramkilawan, the article continues, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The founder and managing director of stockbroking firm Boss Securities Limited said regulations must be expanded to meet the sophisticated operations of the gaming industry. He is quoted as saying, the FIU legislation is sufficient to provide proper oversight for money laundering and counterterrorism. However, we don't want casino operations to infect ordinary citizens. We want enforcement, preventative action, and proper regulatory controls. He said enforcement was important. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Securities and Exchange Commission is a commission that has been established under the laws of Trinidad and Tobago to regulate the trading of stocks and shares, securities. And it does a pretty good job. But of course, not to perfection. Because recently, since I mentioned Boss stockbroking firm had its name called in an issue that began as far back as in 2013. Now, there's some similarity between the gambling industry and the gambling or taking chances on the stock exchange as people do. But of course, the Securities and Exchange Commission is a regulatory commission, and we are only now proposing to establish a gambling commission to deal with the problems in the gambling industry. But a problem arose. The FCB offered, and I'm just giving the example, an initial offer, an IPO. And it turns out from the facts in front of us,
The relevance of the FCB shares and this debate.
Overruled.
it's interesting that the UNC has said, and they don't want to hear anything about that. They don't want to hear anything about that. The point I'm making, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it turns out that about 684,000 shares were purchased by an employee of the FCB, sold within the next 4 months, a profit of $12 million.
Speaker 48-1, please.
FCB is not gaming.
And Mr. Deputy Speaker,
Overruled.
good. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the bottom line, and the reason why I raise this just going forward, is that arising out of that, it is reasonable for the members of the public, the very little people that they claim to be speaking to believe in this country that there is a law for some and another law for others. When we, and I'm not surprised that that the member for Point of Pierre don't want to hear this, because a motion was filed in this parliament to deal with that issue. And it was shut down by the UNC. Yes. So let me press on.
48-6, imputing improper motives to my colleague from Pointe-a-Pierre, who's an honorable and decent man.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would like to take the opportunity to compliment the government of Trinidad and Tobago for taking the bold step, however belatedly, based on the tarrying and the delay of the UNC, to put measures in place to regulate this business. And I want to especially congratulate the members of the Joint Select Committee who worked hard, and I'm satisfied they did a tremendous amount of work against all the UNC odds to be able to bring this legislation to where we are here today. As I said, I'm not surprised at anything they do. I'm convinced that the UNC does not like law and order. I remember, Mr. Deputy Speaker, back in about 2004, I was at that time representing the constituency of Laventille East Mova, and one Saturday morning, I noticed a building was under refurbishment and a casino sign went up at the corner of 6th Avenue in Malik Barataria and the Eastern Main Road. I was shocked. I was shocked. I immediately contacted my leader, the Prime Minister at the time, Mr. Patrick Manning, and I told him of my dissatisfaction. Because shortly before that, 4 persons from East Port of Spain were charged with committing robberies of some casino, in a casino or 2 on Arapita Avenue. I had known about it because I was one of the lawyers in the matter. And I just imagined when I saw that inside of Laventille, inside of my constituency, the trouble that the presence of that place could generate. Because it's not too difficult for one worker in there to use a cell phone and to tell somebody just outside the door, the fella in the red shirt or the fella in the blue shirt is coming downstairs with $60,000. Not too difficult. And that could result in trouble, murder. So I took objection to it. And of course, the Prime Minister agreed, and action was taken, and that establishment, the corporation got involved, and the action was taken to ensure that it did not happen. Today, it now houses a grocery that benefits the people in the community without the social ills that a casino would have brought. The measures before us today regulates these things where they could be, because they'll now have to apply to the commission. Back in that time, they had to ask nobody nothing. You just had to acquire the building, either buy it or lease it and put up your casino. The measures that we have in front of you here today will allow a commission, a regulatory commission, to decide if it should go there. And in some countries, whether it is Atlantic City, whether it is Las Vegas, and other parts of the world, there's no casino in Hong Kong, I understand. They're all in Macau. What some countries do is to put them in remote, if you like, or separate areas. So if you want to gamble, you travel and you go. It is not so accessible as if it is next door to your home. And when I went into the Princess Casino, one of the things that struck me, and that was around 11 o'clock in the morning, I distinctly recall, the place was packed with people, of which about 80% were women. And I asked myself, these women, these mothers, where are their children? Who is taking care of them? Many of them stuck in the casino, and one woman tells me she could be there for hours and hours. Because one of the tricks they have, Mr. Deputy Speaker, apart from fixing the machines, as I explained earlier, is that when you win, some of the prizes you win is not in cash, but it is in other chits and tickets or whatever it takes to gamble again. So part of your winnings includes coupons, so you are stuck in the place. And they have some games that play every hour on the hour. So you have to stay. And they give you free food, and they give you drinks, and they have security, so it is a reasonably safe environment. And people spend a lot of time in there, and all of their money. And some of the victims of that gambling industry told me they wish we, the government at the time, could shut it down. Well, of course, that's not the option we are taking. We want to regulate it. And I'm very proud to see, I think it is in clause, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me just check this. I think it is in clause 64, Mr. Deputy Speaker, yes, where we establish the rehabilitation fund and the development fund, where these monies, as happens in many developed countries, by the billions, we were told that this generates about how much? About 16 billion a year. And if that is the official estimate, it could very well be more, far more. These funds would be established, and this is what this is all about. And who is that designed to protect? The owners? The member for Oropich is concerned about the owners for reasons he would know best. But these measures are designed by the government to protect the ordinary man. And where he needs rehabilitation from the addiction of which I spoke, and the member for Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West spoke, then the rehabilitation fund is designed to meet people like him.
Honorable Member?
Yes, Mr.
Your initial speaking time has elapsed. You have an additional 15 minutes. Care to avail yourself?
Mr. Deputy
Proceed.
Speaker, and I thank you very much. Mr. Deputy Speaker, so I am very, very pleased with the measures that are in front of us. It allows the government to monitor the industry in a serious way. And of course, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that way the government will be able to retrieve much needed taxes to bring satisfaction and relief and meet the needs and expectations of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, because it is with taxes, money collected in taxes, that the government would use to pave roads, give subventions to WASA to provide water for the people, subsidize energy, gas, the $22 tank, 20-pound tank cylinder of gas that the average person uses in their home. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the real cost of that is about $65 to $68. The government pays the difference. We need taxes to do that. The school feeding program, the books, the transport, medicine in the hospital. So when we regulate this industry, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it allows the government a hand and a handle on what is now wild and unregulated. And these casinos dealing with this large amount of cash, here what happens? As the member for Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West alluded to a while ago, they are able to create a serious black market for U.S. currency, because they offer $12, $10, and $8 and $12 for one. So they gather. This informant inside of there told me he has seen as much as $1 million in U.S. singles in his employer's place. So they gather our U.S. money and they take it away, because most, if not all of them, are not citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, but Eastern Europeans and others, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So it has a drain on our foreign exchange. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am very, very, very satisfied in my intellect, in my mind, that what we have in front of us here today is of value to Trinidad and Tobago. It is of value to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It is of value to the workers of Trinidad and Tobago. It is to all of our benefit, including the vulnerable among us. So when the member for Oropouche East made reference to my constituents, I want to see my constituents earning at the top of the food chain. I want to see them excel in academics or acquire the best skills in the modern economies of the world and be able to compete with the best. But I know as a fact that many of them who find jobs in the casino industry is probably because they could find no other. They have to spend long hours, 12, 14 hours to make the little overtime in smoke-filled rooms. Men with no love in their hearts making nasty passes at them. I know a couple of them. When they finish work 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning, they have to sit down on the promenade and wait until the sun comes up before they could get a taxi to go to the little places, districts that they live in. So I know the burdens, and many of them have come to me trying to find an improved circumstance. So we know that these measures will benefit them. So I don't want the member for Orpuch to be telling me about my constituents. I love them, I look out for them, and I want the best for them. And when I went to the Mapao Casino, it was to speak with them to find out what their circumstances was. And I did. And today I'm a wiser man for having spoken to them. As a result, I could stand here on behalf of them and the larger people of Laventille West and to say I give full support on their behalf to these measures and reject the bad behavior of the UNC, the unprincipled behavior of the UNC. Sit down in a joint select committee, as I said before, as I close, for 4 years. 4 years. Pretend to support everything and just take the committee on for a ride. And no minority report. Come here today and spoke an untruth about a minority report. That is the typical behavior of the UNC. And I close by saying again, I will not, but I am very tempted, if I have to judge their supporters, but by their behavior, I would think little of them, but I will not do that. Because there's one among them, the member for Tabakit. I recall him time and time again, speaking loudly, probably this is why he's now being extricated from the team, saying that this industry should be regularized to protect the people of Trinidad and Tobago. But the UNC doesn't want to hear that. As a result, he's being purged. He's being pushed aside. Mr. Deputy Speaker, with those things said, I concur with the views as expressed by the Minister of Finance who piloted this bill, the member for Dago Martin Northeast. And I wholeheartedly, on behalf of the people of Laventille West, support these measures. I thank you.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I was kind of expecting that at this time we would have gone to the vote because this matter does not go to committee. So I don't know what enthusiasm exists for a vote at this time. But I join just to place on record my support for a piece of legislation that has been long in coming in this country and has been worked upon by the Parliament for many a year. I'm a little disappointed that there isn't more enthusiasm for the passage of this legislation. I know that there is politics to be, I don't want to say play, but politics to be noticed. But this is the work of all of us. It is the work of a joint select committee. There was a time early in the term of this government where every piece of legislation we brought into the House to advance the administration of the country and to protect the interests of the population, whatever that might be, the general call from opposition members in response to any piece of legislation was send it to committee. Oui. The impression was being given that that was the way to get consensus. That was the way to get the best of the Parliament. And as they themselves said on many occasions when we advanced legislation without going to committee, they said we want to go to committee because we want to pass good law. It is not that we are obstructionists, it's not that we are unpatriotic, no, none of those things. It's just that we want to pass the law, but we want to pass good law, send it to committee. That was the position of our colleagues on the other side. And on many occasions, not all occasions, we did send legislation to committee, this being one of them. And I don't care what my colleague from Couva South says. I came here fully apprised and well fortified to say and to think and to accept that this piece of legislation had its origin in the previous government. And the desire for legislating and regulating the conduct of gaming and gambling in our country has its origin long time ago. As a matter of fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have a lot of friends in religious communities, believe it or not. And many of those religious leaders are opposed to gambling. And for very many years, the state turned a blind eye to the existence of casino gambling in our society. Because in response to this point of view that gambling is a bad thing and casinos are bad things, we allowed an industry to develop in the country as if it wasn't here. We did the same thing with Playway, you know, Mr. Speaker. People used to bust the mark under trees and under bridges and so. Yes. And millions of dollars were involved. I was a parliamentarian. I came into this parliament in 1987. And I was being told by people in the gambling business how much money was involved in Way. And I could not believe the numbers they were telling me, because I thought it was a few $1 million that people at the Basis Society were entertaining themselves and making a little money in so doing. But they were telling me that Way was real big money, and those who control Way were handling big money in this country. And I only came face to face with that and realized that it was true when the state got involved and created Playway. And I was in the parliament when NLCB Playway generated $1 billion in revenue to the state. And I had to ask myself, before the state got involved in Playway, and Wayway was not acknowledged as an acceptable form of activity requiring the state's attention, look how much money was available in the society for Wayway. And now, even though Playway is a standard activity in the country for decades now, I think, Wayway and Playway is still going on. Because Wayway is still going on using the Playway draw and giving better odds. And hundreds of millions of dollars are still out there. If not billions. So, Mr. Speaker, the point I want to make is this. Even though some people in our society are resolutely opposed to gambling as an activity, and there are those who are resolutely opposed to the existence of casinos as a place to have gaming transactions, the majority of people in this country that we agree to be governed by the point of view of the majority, acknowledging the concerns of the minority, the majority of people in this country have no real problem with gaming and gambling, and have no real problem with it being identified as an area of activity requiring the state's involvement, namely regulation and taxation. And therefore, we want to say to those who have a problem with casinos that it is better to have regulated gaming and gambling in our country so that we could screen out a lot, if not all, but a lot of the deleterious outcomes of gaming and gambling. We as a society, we are far better off having the state passing legislation, creating do's and don'ts, and enforcing the laws that we pass to ensure that we minimize any negatives that may be associated with gaming and gambling, especially on the scale at which it is going on in Trinidad and Tobago. For quite a while, we had very few casinos. When the government, by some kind of subterfuge, decided to tax casinos that weren't supposed to exist, I was in this parliament when, in a budget, I never know what a SIPSAM machine was. I'm in the parliament. I don't know what SIPSAM is.
Every year.
I understand that we're taxing SIPSAM. And I had to ask, what is SIPSAM?
It's in the 5th schedule to this bill.
And then discover that we were taxing that element of gaming and gambling while not legislating and regulating the thing. Of course, that is the worst possible way to try and collect taxes. But what we did then by that kind of vicarious activity is create an acceptance of the business in the country that did not go unnoticed by those who were inclined to invest in the business. And overnight, as we pretended to collect taxes from those people, SIPSAM and SAMSIP and whatever, overnight there was a mushrooming of casinos in Trinidad and Tobago. And all of a sudden, those who were gambling in the shadows had neon lights all over the country, casinos. And those of us who are parliamentarians, we had a duty, and we still have a duty, to ensure that you don't have casino signs around the country without any regulation. That is what we are doing here. That is why we are here. We're not here, as my friend from Couva South tried to say this morning, to try and take away people's jobs. Or here to give the minister power to be ministerial and abuse power. No, 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 no. In simple, straightforward English, in the absence of the state discharging its responsibility to the society, we are here to assume that responsibility. The responsibility to pass legislation to determine that nobody goes with a gambling institution outside of a school door, next door to the church, on a corner interfering with traffic, or worse, operating it in such a way that it damages the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. It's bad enough to turn a blind eye to it if it wasn't doing that. But unregulated gambling has the potential to pose a threat to the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. In many ways. And we're not the first or the only people doing this. Those of us on the other side, our Joint Select Committee has reported to us. And it has reported in a way that we should all be proud of. That the Joint Select Committee went through all the avenues. I was hearing today that we had to have experts because we didn't know anything about gambling. But we come a long way from that. We cannot pretend to know that there's gambling taking place in this country in a multi-billion-dollar way. Not multi-million, you know. Multi-billion-dollar way. And those who want to put their heads in the sand could keep it there. We want to assist you to see, whether you're in the church, in the mosque, in the mandir, or in the ground. Wherever you are, we're saying to you in Trinidad and Tobago today, there's $1 billion industry that is unregulated and that is dangerous. I could tell you, Madam Speaker, there's something called the International Association of Gaming Regulations. The International Association of Gaming Regulators. I want to repeat that. There's an International Association of Gaming Regulators. And let me just run down the list of various types of countries in which gambling and gaming is allowed, but they have in place done what we are trying to do here. So it is quite disingenuous for any of our colleagues or whoever to say we are trying to do something that is revolutionary, unnecessary, unwarranted. We are simply catching up as latecomers. Catching up as latecomers, and if you don't believe me, I was very embarrassed when I read the newspaper in Trinidad and Tobago and saw that the American authorities had taken action against an American citizen who was operating a casino in Trinidad and had run afoul of American law by not declaring his earnings in Trinidad, and I presume it was American money in US dollars in America that he brought into America and didn't declare its source in Trinidad. So here it was, Trinidad gambling in Trinidad and Tobago dollars. Found its way into a US banking system. The owner of that money was prosecuted in America. And we, the people in Trinidad and Tobago, oblivious to all of this and like we don't give a damn. And that is why we are here. And I'm not talking about a few dollars. I'm talking one casino, one person in that instance, and it was, I think it was about millions of dollars.
1.5 million US dollars.
1.5 million US. How much is that in TT dollars?
Take it at 10.
10 million TT dollars. One of the many casinos, one, was facing a $10 million issue in America, where the foreign government, living in Trinidad and collecting money here, but ran afoul of a place where there was law. Madam Speaker, in Australia, there are a number of gaming commissions. In Antigua and Barbuda, we have the Financial Services Regulatory Commission. In Australia, at the federal level of Australia, we have the Australian Communications and Media Authority. Then at the capital level, we have the Australia Capital Territory Gambling and Racing Commission. In New South Wales, we have the Liquor and Gaming Commission of New South Wales. In Queensland, you have the Office of Liquor and Gaming Regulation. In Victoria, we have the Victorian Commission of Gambling and Liquor Regulation. In Western Australia, we have the Department of Local Government, Sports and Cultural. All of these in one country. But it's a federal system, and you have the states from Western State, Victoria, whatever, and they all see it fit to have regulation and gaming commissions to regulate this industry and to protect themselves from any of the bad side of this thing. In Bermuda, we have the Bermuda Casino Gaming Commission. In Brazil, it's done by the Ministry of Finance. In Canada, in Manitoba, you have the Liquor and Gaming Authority of Manitoba. In Ontario, Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario. In Denmark, we have the Danish Gambling Authority. In Finland, we have the National Police Board of Finland Gambling Administration. In Gibraltar, we have the Gambling Division and the Government of Gibraltar. In Great Britain, we have simply the Gambling Commission. In the Isle of Man, we have the Isle of Man Gambling Supervision Commission. In Jersey Island, on the Channels, you have the Jersey Gambling Commission. In Malta, we have the Malta Gaming Authority. In the Netherlands, we have the Netherlands Gaming Authority. In Norway, we have the Norwegian Gaming and Foundation Authority. In Seychelles, we have the Financial Services Authority. In Singapore, we have the Casino Regulatory Authority of Singapore. In South Africa, at the national level, we have the National Lotteries Commission. In the Eastern Cape, we have the Eastern Cape Gambling and Betting Board. In South Africa, we have the Mpumalanga Gambling Board. In South Africa, in the Western Cape, we have the Western Cape Gambling and Racing Board. All of those last four I mentioned in one country in South Africa. In Swaziland, we have the Swaziland Gaming Board of Control. In Sweden, we have the Swedish Gambling Authority. In Switzerland, Federal Gaming Board. In Turkey, we have the Ministry of Finance Gaming Board. In America, we have a lot of them. California, the California Gambling Control Commission. Colorado Division of Gaming. In Delaware Division of Gaming Enforcement. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts, they have a gaming commission. United States in Jersey, the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement. I gave you that spectrum, Madam Speaker, so you could understand. It's people with all different kinds of societies, from Turkey to Bermuda, from very liberal to very conservative, European, African, Caribbean, North America, South America, all over the world there's gambling. And all over the world, gambling activity is regulated by the governments of the strictly so. And that is why we are playing catch up here. This is no time for joke and playing games. We are late. So asking to delay it further on spurious grounds is irresponsible and disingenuous. And for those people who are religious, I simply want to point out to them that being religious, we understand your position and your belief, your doctrine. But all over in that plethora of countries I just called, there are people who are religious and there are people who are not. And they're all better off by having the state regulating gambling within all these countries. And Trinidad and Tobago is about to join that now. Nobody could make a serious case that we are better off having every Tom, Dick, and Harry open a casino, conduct casino business, billions of dollars, interfere with our financial system, pauperize people, encourage criminality, launder money. It was so bad here in Trinidad and Tobago, I don't know if you all remember this, that the banking system in Trinidad and Tobago took a position not to offer its services to casino operations. And you know why? It wasn't that they were not customers, you know. They were customers in the bank. And because of the propensity and the exposure to criminal conduct and criminal liabilities that will fall on the banking system, casinos were debanked. They were given short notice and asked to remove their monies from the bank. Are you all aware of that? And if you're aware of it, have you spent a moment asking where is that money going? And what is that money doing? If these millions that we were told about today cannot properly enter the bank to be recorded and to be accounted for, where is it? Where is it? And what is it doing in the criminality of money laundering? Why don't you care? And if you should be cared about, if you care about anything, don't come here and trump up any argument about workers losing their jobs. Be concerned about locals really losing their jobs. Because if you import something into this country and you're paying $10 for it, and you're making a $1 selling it for $11, somebody who handling casino money, paying no taxes, accounting to no one, could import the same thing and sell it for $8 and you lost your workers, lost your business. That's what money laundering does. That's what money laundering does. And I want to say to my colleagues, when we won our seats and came into this parliament, every one of us came to this table and said something, took an oath of office. Right there, we took an oath of office to act without fear or favor, without malice or ill will, in the protection of the interests of all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And today, you have a duty to observe that oath, or stand up here and make a case in defense of us continuing in this country without regulation of the gambling industry. It is not sufficient to abstain. To abstain is to be complicit and presenting a danger. Our Joint Select Committee has reported here. Our Joint Select Committee has reported. And your vote is required in support of our committee's work. Madam Speaker, we hear a lot from our colleagues about crime and criminality. And one gets the impression that because of the effect that murders have on all of us, that our colleagues only see crime as murder. Murder is probably the most heinous of crimes. But there's a whole plethora of other crimes that we ought to be concerned about as well. And one of it is money laundering, and the other is tax evasion. You couldn't really be asking for the owners of those profits, like the one who took it to America and ended up in jail, The owners of those profits should be allowed to continue unimpeded, unhindered. But you want police to pass down the street and secure them when the night comes. Who's to pay for the police? You want them to stay there with workers who can't organize themselves. My colleagues from Orapuch East and Cuba South love to play union men inside here. Which of those casino workers, those females who are exploited, which of them do they encourage to organize themselves into trade unions? Not one of them. So they will raise their children from toddler to adulthood, working on minimum wage, abused in casinos in this country, and threatened if they come out, if they only do so. So you could bring them to Parliament in large numbers and say, you're coming to fight the PNM. It is the PNM who will pass this law with your support and protect this country from that kind of exploitation. And I want to say this without fear of contradiction because I speak here with two hats on. I'm head of the government and I'm head of the political party called the People's National Movement. And nowhere, Madam Speaker, is there any casino making any promises, holding out any benefit to the PNM not to pass this law. Because we stand on the oath we took in here to act without fear, without favor, without malice, and without ill will. And once we do that, we would have acted in the interests of all the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, this International Association of Gaming Regulators highlight for us the components of this industry and the powers that regulators should have in dealing with the industry. What does the regulation and the regulatory authority handle? It ought to handle compliance and auditing of gambling operators. That's the main thing. Compliance means make sure they follow the law, and audit gambling operators to make sure that whatever money is going there is accounted for under the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. Tax avoidance is legal, right?
Avoidance, yes.
Tax evasion is illegal.
It's illegal.
Right, so tax evasion. That's what compliance and auditing allows you to minimize, if not eliminate, tax evasion. Licensing, meaning you determine who is authorized as a fit and proper person. Persons with criminal conduct and criminal intent known to the state ought not to have a license to run a casino. You must be fit and proper, meaning that there ought to be some modicum of moral underpinning and an absence of criminal conduct in your record if you want to run a casino. Licensing, and secondly, the location of the institution and the establishment must be important. That's how you determine you don't build them next to churches and schools and other places of offense. And you license them, they meet a certain standard set by this country through its parliament. Otherwise, you don't get a license. Issuing of fines, meaning enforcement. You would have heard when I read how some countries name their commissions. Some of them are called enforcement agencies. Gambling and enforcement. There's no point in making laws if you are not going to enforce them. And who should know that more than the people of Trinidad and Tobago? So you make the laws, and then you enforce it. That's not oppression. That is protection. And then you provide oversight and supervision and market analysis. Good business. Oversight for the business and analyze the market as you go ahead. Prosecution of breaches of gambling legislation, enforcement. Policy development. This law may not be perfect like most laws are. If after we pass this law, colleagues, there's need to come back and amend it, we will do that too. If something happens that requires the policy to be tweaked by a government in Trinidad and Tobago, you tweak the policy and you come back because we're always amending laws. So don't come and tell me you're not going to vote for it because it's not perfect. You are not perfect. I'm not perfect. Very few things are perfect. Perfection is God himself. We pass laws, do the best that we can, having taken 4 years to come to this point? Who are we? Who are we? 20 years we can't get a gallon of gas out of Laurel Manatee. We come here today to say we are now about to get it. My colleague's upset. Leader of the other side, throwing words at me. But I can tell you, I lead this team and I fear no consequence. As long as I stand for the people of Trinidad and Tobago in this place as a job that I've been selected to do, I fear no consequence. I sleep good at night. Preparation of legislation. I want to congratulate the Attorney General, the Minister of Finance, and the entire JSC. We have done that. This country has prepared the legislation. Let's pass it. We are going off for evaluation. A few weeks ago, we had here in Trinidad and Tobago our global FATF visitors here to assess us to determine whether we can be elevated from where we are in the darkness to come out of it and stand proudly among the countries in the world who are serious about managing their affairs in today's world. Would we be able to come out, or would we be stopped? Because one of the things that we have failed to do is to pass appropriate legislation to govern the casino business in our country. Is that what you want? You want us to fail the FATF examination on the grounds that we failed to pass this? And there's another point I want to make right here. My colleagues keep talking about election and election and election, and we're doing things before election and in the last few days. Let me just say something to you. A term of office in Trinidad and Tobago is 5 years. And you should know that more than anybody else. Because the 5 years, and then you have to call an election within 90 days. Okay? So when we are doing the people's business in the first year, the second year, the third year, the fourth year, or the fifth year, that is what we are being elected to. So stop wasting your time and trying to talk about how close we are to the next election. Because we are all bound by the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. We can't stay here one day beyond what the law allows. Because we do not intend to seize power in this country. We are authorized to be here for a fixed period, and during that period, every day is as important as the first day we came into office. But to get back to what the gaming commissions do, they collect taxes, duties, and similar levies. Is that what is driving this recalcitrance on the other side?
Member for Diego Martin West, wow. The original 30 minutes is now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to wind.
My colleagues, I'd like to have all of it. One of the requirements, one of the duties, what comes into play when we have a regulation and a regulatory agency is the collection of taxes and duties. Madam Speaker, one of the things this country is coming face to face with as a result of the demonetization that this government undertook in this country recently is the extent to which we ought to be concerned about tax evasion. Correct. Yes. And we did a study earlier on by experts from UWI who told us, independent experts, who told us that 40% of the collectible taxes in Trinidad and Tobago is not collected because of the poor approach in collecting taxes and largely the failure of tax collection as an activity, a governmental activity in Trinidad and Tobago. So I'm not surprised that there are people who don't want this because they want to preserve a situation where collection of taxes and duties remain the same. Parliamentary colleagues, we're not part of that group. We cannot be part of that. We cannot be part of saying we don't want this because it will improve collection of taxes. Education. Many people in this country have no idea about the details of the gambling industry in our country because it is there as if it's not there. Huh? Education. That will be a function of the agency.
Correct.
Let the population understand what it means, how it operates, its benefits, its opportunities, and its dangers. And then, of course, research. This billion-dollar industry in this country, research is an integral part of the responsibility of the agency. Policing, a certain amount of self-policing is required in the industry, you know, for their own protection. Because if something goes wrong, and whatever that might be, and it causes the industry to be viewed in a negative light, it could be damaging to the industry. So you need to protect your investment if you're an authorized investor in the gaming industry. The matter of setting of taxation rates. The government wants to tax at a certain level. You need to talk to somebody. You don't talk to the workers and send them in here, force them to come in here, and then give the impression that the government is afraid of their vote on election day. No. There should be a body that you can sit down with and talk reasonably as to what is reasonable taxation, what is good for them and good for the country, and therefore you have a real industry with a future. And of course, treating of gambling addicts. We don't have any business in this country that treats with people who smoke and get themselves sick through tobacco products. I don't know we have any industry and any arrangement to deal with people, except in the NGO sector. People who are ruining or have ruined their lives through drinking alcohol. But in this, one of the roles of the regulator is treating with the addiction that could be associated with some people who get involved with gaming. And that particular aspect is the one that caused many of the religious leaders to say they don't want it in the country. But we can't be afraid of a pin because it might prick your finger. We can't be afraid of a needle because one might get lost in the carpet. There's so much more that needles do. There's so much more that pins do. And therefore we can regulate this industry, preserve the jobs, improve the jobs, because the terms and conditions must improve. Terms and conditions of casino workers must improve, because I guarantee you that the day this law is passed, they will organize themselves and get the benefit of the Industrial Relations Act.
Bring it into the light.
What does it do? What does all this do? You get consumer protection, protection of the consumer. Fellas fixing one-arm bandits, so it only pays out 1%.
Nobody checking.
Who is checking that? Somebody has to, some independent authority has to protect you from that. So there's protection for the consumer. Problem gambling. If you are a person who is gambling as a problem gambler, it is in the interest of the casino to identify you. And you can get help. Regulation of gambling product marketing. What are the products that we allow in the gambling business in this country? Is that free fall? A free fall? Or we regulate the products that are allowed to be in the mix? And therefore, if there's something that is particularly damaging or we don't want it at all, we can keep it out. And what we can accept, we put in a license. Regulation of that. And of course, the big demon, money laundering. And then other crimes related to gambling. And of course, there's the corporate social responsibility, match fixing and sports integrity. These are all subject matters which this commission and this country working together must look at. In 97% of the jurisdictions where there's established legal regulations, acknowledgement of their existence and regulation and tax collection, they have lotteries. 97% of the world's jurisdiction where gambling takes place allow lotteries. 94% allow bingo as a gambling item. 91% allows casinos. 85% allow slot machines. 82% allows betting in other forms. And then only 29% allow casino games outside of casinos. The research of the International Association of Gaming Regulators. And all of these things are covered in our law, giving us the ability to act responsibly in these areas of concern. Why is that wrong? Why are you not supporting that? Colleagues, why are you not supporting that? $59 in the betting markets, in the betting markets that do not have restrictions in place for foreign investment, 59% of jurisdictions do not have restrictions in place for foreign investment. We will have some element of restriction on foreign investment. Right now, in the current climate, is it true to say that only mainly foreigners, mainly foreigners, mainly foreigners benefit from this industry without government oversight and control? Colleagues, this is madness. They have to export their profits. Our dollar is not recoverable outside of Trinidad and Tobago to bring it back here. You can't use Trinidad and Tobago dollars outside. What are they taking outside? They're taking off foreign exchange outside to repatriate their profits. And while they're doing that, unbeknownst to and not controlled by any state agency, not even the police. Colleagues, why are you not supporting this? I heard the case being made by a couple of my colleagues today as though there's some problem with this law. If what they have made is the case that they've made against supporting it, are you telling me that what I'm saying now is less important to you than what you said here all afternoon? Or is this just a plain, another instance of dereliction of duty? The president came in this house and said she signed off on 40-odd pieces of legislation, none of which, according to her, none of which, she said, people told her, benefited the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I could tell you one thing. When we pass this law, colleagues, if you wake up out of your slumber and pass this law with us, nobody could say that this is not for the benefit and protection of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Nobody could say that, because this is late in coming, long in coming, but better late than never. Some restrictions in foreign exchange, foreign handling, in our environment. And of course, gambling comes in a variety of forms. Around the world, with 80% of the jurisdictions, Madam Speaker, there's state or public gaming. And 70% there's private involvement in gaming. And 42% gaming for charity. We cover all those bases. We cover all those bases. Our committee did the work to cover all those bases. Let me just end, Madam Speaker, by drawing to the attention of my colleagues who may not have come here today to support this legislation, what we are facing. If we do nothing, the activity out there will continue as it's going. It will mushroom further and pose a bigger threat to all of us for precious little benefit. I know they will tell you they get some employment for some ladies out there. That is a joke to what the industry really is. Giving us crumbs while threatening our piggy bank is not a good enough balance. And the industry is exposed to money laundering, illegal gambling, cheating, fraud, and gambling addicts and stealing And those are not my summaries. Those are the summaries of the International Association of Gaming Regulators. And you all know that. And you're all asking us to leave it the way it is, so that money laundering, illegal gambling, cheating, fraud, and gambling addiction and stealing is the order of the day. Why? My UNC colleagues, I want to ask you all today, let this not be your epitaph. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 15.5, I beg to move that the House continue to sit until the conclusion of the matter before it.
Honorable members, the question is that the House continue to sit until the conclusion of the matter before it. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? Minister of Finance.
I did not say that. Do not lie. Madam Speaker, be quiet, please. I'll ask for protection. Madam Speaker, I just want to put on the record some facts, because we heard from the member for Couva South and we heard from the member for Oropouche East. I don't recall the member for Oropouche East as being a member of the committee. I do remember the member for Couva South for being a member of the committee. I want to put some facts on the record, and these facts need to be repeated. I have in my possession Cabinet Minute number 733 of March 26, 2015. And what is relevant about this Cabinet Minute? The first thing that's relevant is that it was approved under the government of the UNC under the former Prime Minister, the Honorable Member for Siparia. So that's the first point. March 26, 2015, 6 months before the general election of September 2015. And what is the second relevant point about this? It contradicts the contribution of the member for Oropouche East. Because Cabinet agreed, the Cabinet of the UNC, to approve a number of things, but the most important things, in contradiction to what the member for Oropouche East said, is Cabinet, the UNC Cabinet, approved the Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Application for Gaming Licenses Regulations 2015. The Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Accounting and Internal Control Regulations 2015. The Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Anti-Money Laundering Casino Regulations 2015. The Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Gaming Devices and Equipment Regulations 2015. The Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Regulations 2015. All of these regulations were prepared by the UNC government. Every single one of them. Regulations dealing with licenses, accounting, money laundering, gaming devices, etc. And the regulations that we circulated in 2017, Madam Speaker, the regulations which they pretend do not exist. It's amazing to come into this parliament and hear a member of the committee pretend, after serving on a committee for 3 years, after having been part of this UNC government in 2015, come in this parliament and pretend that these regulations were not drafted by the UNC. And all we did, all the PNM committee did, under the PNM government, the parliamentary committee that is, was to recirculate the regulations drafted by the UNC government. It is shameful, Madam Speaker, for a member to come and pretend that he has no knowledge of regulations and where are the regulations, and we need to look at the regulations before we could even contemplate looking at the legislation, when the regulations are theirs. And all of the regulations that the member for Oropouche East was nitpicking over. This piece, you don't like that word, you don't like this. Those are his regulations, Madam Speaker. It is political hypocrisy of the highest. Political hypocrisy Secondly, Madam Speaker, it needs re-emphasizing that it is absolutely impossible for there to be a minority report to this report that is dated June or July 2019. That is physically impossible because this report that is before the House, that is the subject of the motion that is for debate today, is dated November 20th, 2019. If the report that is before the House is dated November 20th, 2019, and was circulated and laid in the House in November 2019, how on earth can you have a minority report dated June or July 2019? It's a complete fiction, a total fabrication, Madam Speaker. It is amazing. They think that everybody in this country is stupid. Stupid. The member for Oropouche came out. I have a minority report. Look at the date. What is it? June 26, 2019. I'm waving it here. We had a minority report. It's impossible. The minority report has to have the same date as the main report. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I know, but it's, of course, it's an excuse, Honorable Member for Digger Martin West, through you, Madam Speaker. It is absolutely ridiculous. All of them talk to us and talk about the pernicious evils that exist in this unregulated gambling sector. The addiction, the crime, murder, all sorts of heinous crimes taking place in this unregulated sector. Stealing, cheating, intimidation, addiction, exploitation, all of that taking place in this unregulated gambling sector. They know that because they speak to us. They speak to us about it. It's absolutely incredible. And, you know, Madam Speaker, when you read this executive summary, I just want to read out one section. The Joint Select Committee on the Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Bill worked arduously to produce legislation that was fit for purpose in a bipartisan effort worthy of plaudits. Each clause of the bill was meticulously examined in light of international best practice to ensure that the bill did not merely copy other legislation, but was adapting these practices to the local context. Contributions from each member were deeply appreciated as they sought to guarantee the rights and liberties of Trinidad and Tobago citizens. Madam Speaker, every single one of the opposition members who was in this committee agreed with every single clause in this bill. All 94 clauses, all 20 pages of schedules. They agree with everything. And at the last minute, they raised a red herring about regulations. So we deferred the laying of the report to have an opportunity to revisit the regulations for the third time. And we had meetings and we went through every single regulation. They did not say a word. They agreed with everything. It is scandalous, Madam Speaker. And obviously there's more in the mortar than the pestle. What would motivate members opposite? Being aware of what is going on in this gambling sector. What would motivate them? What would motivate the member for Tabaquite?
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that this House do now adjourn to Wednesday, the 12th day of February 2020 at 1:30 p.m. Madam Speaker, at that time, we will do the committee business, motion number 3, as it appears on today's order paper.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn to Wednesday, the 12th day of February 2020 at 1:30 p.m. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned to Wednesday, the 12th day of February 2020 at 1:30 p.m.